You can walk it off. Just try. By Nim P. Pseudo. Chapter 1. Mask Flies. That was what those winged little things were called. Quarrel couldn't place who had told him that, but it seemed like an apt enough name. Dozens of those creatures perched on the mossy cavern walls, peering down at him with dark, slitted eyes. A group of them milled about on the path ahead, and he paused to observe. They hopped from moss clump to moss clump, bending briefly to snap bites, jerking upright to scan for threats. They repeated this process in a sort of dance, backs arching, wings fanning, heads pivoting from side to side. Quarrel felt an urge to sketch one of the creatures, to immortalize the moment in parchment and ink. If only that cartography shop hadn't been closed. If only he knew how to draw. He took a step closer, but in a flutter of wings, the mask flies were gone. They were certainly nimble creatures, vigilant and quick to flight. Quarrel appreciated attributes like that, the sort which were all too necessary in Hallownest. He resumed his stroll, resolving to circle back to the surface at some point and pick up a quill or two. The abundant verdure and waterfalls summoned the name Green Path to Quarrel's mind. He couldn't pin the origin of this word either, but that didn't bother him. The past wasn't worth dredging through, at least not at the moment. There were so many far more interesting things ahead, waiting just beyond the next bend in the tunnel. Moss sighed beneath Quarrel's feet, bushes rustled against his outstretched arms, and cool beads of water speckled his shell. Greenpath seemed like such a gentle place, made of fuzzy edges and amiable hues. Even the sporadic pools of acid roiled in a sort of merriment. He passed a vine-covered bench, and the mood of it was so inviting that he considered taking a nap right then and there. But he decided against it. For all the delight swirling in his chest, Quarrel could not blind himself to the threats lurking beneath the leaves. Fool-eaters flanked the beaten path, their thorny maws poised to close around anyone heedless enough to wander near. From the thick, waxy consistency of their roots, they were clearly well fed. Quarrel stopped. Fool-eater? Where had that name come from? One of the locals? No. An old scroll, then? He couldn't recall having ever read a scroll, or seen one for that matter. A noise shattered the glass of Quarrel's reverie, a clang, metallic and strident, coming from somewhere far away. Its dying echoes trailed down a moss-flanked tunnel, as though beckoning him. The noise resounded a second time, a third, and Quarrel finally recognized what it was. Battle. Before he could even consult with his legs, they were in motion, charging after what? Adventure? Peril? Fate? He did not know, but at the least it would be something new. Quarrel skidded over a bed of fallen leaves and into a cavern jagged with stalagmites. A dozen winged creatures flitted about the spires, jabbing at a retreating blur with their nail-sharp proboscises. The blur, a bug? A warrior? Lashed out at them with a weapon of its own. The cutting edge of a glaive swept out and up, narrowly missing one of the flying things and following through to slam against a wall. Cringing against the sound, Quarrel tried to make sense of the battlefield, but too much was obscured behind the stalagmites. He clambered onto a ledge along the cavern wall and looked down from his new perch. The room was like a maze, and the warrior bumbled from one dead end to another. The flying things, the squits, Quarrel somehow knew, hovered just out of the warrior's reach, taking turns hurling themselves down like lances. The warrior evaded with nimble steps and shrugs, always remaining a thread's width from danger. Yet their every counterattack failed. The glaive, the double-bladed glaive, performed more like a percussion instrument than a killing tool. It struck the walls, the floor, and a half-dozen stalagmites, but never its intended target. Quarrel's shoulders were a knot. He had clamped a claw on the hilt of his nail without even realizing. What was he to do? Leap to the rescue? Was that really the reason he'd come? But when had he ever willingly joined a fight? He was here to observe, not kill. Surely this didn't concern him. No need to gamble his life so soon. There were so many wondrous sights still to be seen. He didn't want one rash decision to end the journey before it had really begun. The warrior took a fall, a bad one. The crunch of shell and gasp of pain reached Quirrell even over the squid's droning. Propped against a stalagmite, the warrior lifted their glaive with one arm, warding the proboscises with exhausted swipes. The nail rattled in Quirrell's grip. He cursed silently and crouched low, readying to lunge. But before he could act, a shriek rent the air. No, not a shriek, a roar. A thrashing, twisting sound that sent tremors through the cavern, rattling the ceiling and causing sheets of dust to tumble down. The squits were caught in the reverberations, wobbling like boats on rough waters. Their precise, predatory formation fell to pieces, and they fled the cavern, scattering down tangent passageways. Quirrell knelt, not daring to move, not daring to breathe. He waited for the sound of some great terror to drag itself across the stones, for the sickening crack of a shell being torn open and feasted upon. But there was nothing, not after 1 minute, or 2. Whatever produced that roar must have wandered elsewhere, and for that Quirrell thanked his bountiful luck. With the squits dispersed, he supposed it was time to check on the warrior. If that bountiful luck persisted, then they would be more willing to exchange words than blows. He hopped down from the perch and wove through the stalagmites, making his steps slow and exaggerated, announcing his presence. The last thing he needed was for the warrior to strike him down in fright. "Hello?" he warbled. After a few turns, he came upon the warrior's slumped form. If from injury or lunacy, Quirrell couldn't guess, but the warrior hadn't fled at the roar. Their glaive was braced against the ground, ready to skewer the next foe. Quirrell cocked his head, now finally being granted a clear look. Mantis. Another name out of the dark. But that was what she was. A female mantis. One of the warrior tribe. And a lord at that. With long limbs, articulated claws, and lustrous horns. "Stop!" the mantis rasped. "Not another step!" Quirrell obeyed. "Easy now," he said softly. "I'm no threat to you." The mantis cast a look to the nail at Quirrell's waist, and to his claw still clutching the hilt. With a start, Quirrell let go and raised his arms in an assuaging gesture. "Honestly, I mean no harm. This little barb is for self-defense, nothing more." Using the stalagmite for support, the mantis labored to her full height. She loomed over Quirrell, a good head taller, though if she sought to exude menace, her injuries stymied the effect. The carapace of her right shoulder bore a nasty fracture, and she hid that arm beneath the folds of a half-cloak. "Why have you come here?" By just a fraction, Quirrell relaxed. Halonest had so far taught him that any bug still capable of posing a question was far less dangerous company. He cleared his throat. "In all truth, I couldn't say. The sound of your clash set my legs in motion before I could object. I suppose some part of me felt the need to investigate." "The sensible tend to flee from battle," the mantis said, "not charge at it. Are you in your right mind, bug?" "Ha! How would I answer that? If a mad bug knows itself to be so, is it still mad? I'd certainly call myself sane, but that's no guarantee." The mantis hummed. "You are a strange one, it seems." She shifted her hold on the glaive and leaned on it like a makeshift walking stick. The act seemed to convey ease, but from the tremble in her arm, she was on the brink of collapse. "Are you all right?" Quirrell ventured. The mantis grew rigid, as though the words had been a slap. "Quite. Now, I hope that you are satisfied with your investigation, for I must bid you farewell." She turned to leave. "I have a matter to attend to else." But her balance failed, and she toppled. In the midst of the fall, she reached out with her right arm to catch herself, but half the limb simply wasn't there. Quirrell thought to help, to grab her by the shoulder, but he was far too slow. The Mantis hit the ground in a heap, her clattering glaive quick to follow. Had he seen that properly? Her arm was missing? Had it been severed in the battle? Were Mantis so hardy that they could share a conversation moments after losing a limb? Coral hovered above the fallen Mantis, debating whether to move her. He possessed no bandages, no skills in the healing arts, no knowledge of Mantis anatomy. He wished that his ephemeral memories would offer something more useful than names and vague notions. If only he knew how to splint a carapace or staunch the flow of blood. But wait. Blood? There was none. Not a drop. On the Mantis or the cavern floor? Did her kind not bleed? Coral crouched beside the Mantis and listened to her breath. At the very least, she was still alive. "Warrior, can you hear me?" Coral asked. "May I aid you?" The Mantis's only reply was a half-conscious mutter. For the lack of an alternative, Coral took it as consent. He heaved her off the stone and placed her against a stalagmite. The fracture on her shoulder looked painful, but far from life-threatening. The arm was likely to be more of a serious problem. Gingerly, Coral lifted the half-cloak. The arm was indeed missing, at least partially. It ended just below the elbow, sheared off by some terrible force. But it did not bleed, for it had scarred over long ago. Something struck Coral in the chest, and he found himself painfully seated upon the ground. "I said no," the Mantis slurred. Her remaining arm was raised defensively, and it occurred to Coral that she had just shoved him, but so quickly that he hadn't even processed. Coral rubbed at his lower back. "Sincerest apologies, but you seemed in need of a helping claw." "I am fine." The Mantis shook her head, attempting to retrieve her bearings. "Do not concern yourself with me." "Is that so? I'm a stranger in these lands and know nothing of local customs. Is it a common practice to collapse face first after battle? I'll be sure not to overreact next time." The Mantis huffed and attempted to stand, but couldn't muster the strength. She gave Coral a long, analyzing look. "What is it you seek? Something must motivate your persistence." "What do I seek? Why, adventure, of course," Coral trilled. "The urge to explore and discover is what motivates me. So many outlandish tales radiate from this old kingdom. It's a perfect place for an intrepid bug such as myself. I intend to delve its depths and spy its every time-lost marvel." "Hallownest bears no kindness for the frail," the Mantis said. "Not to shatter your hopes, but you will likely die long before achieving that goal." Coral shrugged. "Perhaps, but a life spent without new experiences is no life at all. Already I've seen things beyond my imagining, and I've only just arrived." "Fair enough, but what is it that you desire from me? I wish you luck on your quest, but I cannot share in it. I have my own ends to pursue." "Oh, don't worry. I'm in no need of a guide. I prefer to do my own wandering. But as I've hinted, the history of this land is unknown to me. If you've any tales or legends, or even words of advice, I would very much like to hear them." The Mantis was silent for a moment. "Words, then? That is all you demand?" Coral waved a claw. No, not a demand. I can offer a trade of sorts. There was a bench not too far back. You would find it a far more comfortable spot to recuperate than here. If I serve as a trusty crutch, would you reward me with a story or two?" The Mantis let out a single terse laugh. "When first I spied you with that nail in your grip, I thought you abandoned after my glaive and my geo, not some starry-eyed explorer intent on stories." Coral leaned back, looking down at himself. "Do I have a sinister look about me?" "No," the Mantis said thoughtfully. "No, you do not.